Outstanding. Hey guys, here we are for chapter 6.2. We're going to look at the factors affecting human population size. Pretty straightforward. We touched base on this actually, I think, in chapter 5. The basic thing, births, deaths, immigration. That's really it. As long as you can understand those things, that's what it really boils down to. It decreases through death and emigration, like immigration spelled with an E, people leaving a country or an area, and it increases with births and immigration, people moving in. Now, some of the key factors in that, though, are the average number of children born to women in a population. This is known as the total fertility rate. We're going to talk about a couple of different types of birth rates. So total fertility rate, normally it's just as TFR, but this is one of the big ones. So what we do is we just look at the crude birth rate, the number of live births per 1,000 people. So take a general 1,000 people and how many births are born to them, versus the crude death rate, same thing, per 1,000 people in an area, a population per year, how many people die. So in general, we take 1,000 people, how many births tend to occur? Of those 1,000 people, how many deaths tend to occur? And that gives us population change. The births plus the immigration minus the deaths plus immigration. Very simple math. Not difficult to process at all. Just going to be able to plug in the data. Births plus immigration minus deaths plus immigration. Once again, something that we'll look at, process in class. All right, fertility rates. Fertility rates, specifically here, we tend to talk about women only. The replacement level fertility rate. This one's very important. It's a very simple number, but this is the average number of children a couple must bear to replace themselves. Now, obviously, this gets tricky in the real world because people don't always stay with the same couple forever. But, in general, if you're talking about, a man and a woman and they stay together, the number of children that they would have to bear to replace themselves. So the number can get tricky when there's divorce or people have multiple partners, but it gives us an area and something to look at and think about. So a lot of times I'm going to talk about a couple that gets together and stays together their whole life. I realize that's not reality, and there's some ways that we can look at it in a more complex setting, but it does help you get the idea. The number for that, what is it? Two people have to have how many babies to replace themselves? Wait, yeah, it's not two, because of a very simple reason. Are there some people born that actually can't give birth because of some defect when they're born? Sure. Does every person born go on, every female born go on to have children? Not necessarily. A good friend of mine, teacher at another school, he and his wife have chosen not to have children. When I grew up as a kid, my neighbors across the street from me, the Heldermans, they didn't have children. It was a choice. They were capable, but they just didn't want to have children. Go figure. Have we all known or heard about a teenager dying before? Yeah, it happens. So not everybody born makes it to adulthood. So the number is 2.1, approximately 2.1. Now granted, you can't have a 0.1 kid, but I could have two, you could have two, somebody's going to have three, somebody will have one, some will have, but when we look at 1,000 people, we want the fertility rate to be 2.1. That is a replacement level. That just keeps the population exactly where it is, give, take. There's a lot more complexity, but the reason it's 2.1, not everybody makes it to adulthood. When we look at this total fertility rate, TFR, we're talking about the average number of children born to women of childbearing age in a population. Once again, childbearing age by and large, is going to be from, say, 15 to 45. In reality, it's probably going to be closer to 20 to 40, but pushing the limits on each end, somewhere between 15 and 45 is basically childbearing age for women. Now, between 1955 and 2018, the global TFR, total fertility rate, dropped from 5 to 2.4. Now, to actually halt population growth, we got to get to what? Yeah, 2.1. 2.1. It came down from 1955, worldwide, 5 down to 2.4. That's good. Moving in the right direction. But for us to just get where the population is going to level off, we've got to get to a global 2.1. So some countries could be below 2.1, but some countries are well over, taking us to the global 2.4. All right, U.S. fertility rates. So the chart we have back here is going to be between 1917 and 2015, 2018, depending on when this was actually put together by the authors. If you take a look in the U.S., go all the way back to the very beginning of it, 1917. U.S. has a fertility rate of about 3.2, something of that nature, and it basically decreased up until, the mid-35 or so, got down. That line is the 2.1. So somewhere around 1935, 1936, the U.S. was at this fertility rate where we're just at replacement. It's not like it was a goal, this is just what was going on. Then it begins to increase again. Now we have this kind of sharp uptick. Between 1946 and 1964, the baby boom. World War II ended, the GIs all came home, and yeah, we had our baby boom. Things tended to be affluent. People came back from the war, glad the war is over. We tended to have a bit of an economic boom. Things were growing, and a baby boom. Fertility rates went up. People had more babies, averaged like 3.5 or something. And then it drops back down. Now note, since 1972, our fertility rate has been below 2.1. But what's been happening to the U.S. population? It's still been continuing decline. Why? Why is the U.S. population continuing to increase even though our fertility rate has gone below the replacement level? Immigration. Bingo. Immigration has brought people into the U.S. in large numbers since 1972. Not that it hasn't been going on before, but that's why our population is increasing. So, the human population size in 2050. We want to try and predict population change. We're estimating it's going to be between 7.8 billion and 10.8 billion. Well, the people guessing the low end, they missed it, right? We're already at 7.8 billion. We're beyond it. We looked at that world clock earlier today. We've already passed the low estimate. And that's a problem with predicting population change. You have to make good guess. If you think the population fertility rate's going to go down and it doesn't, your numbers get off. We're predicting somewhere between what the population is right now and maybe 10.8, getting close to 11 billion by 2050. Well, there's a lot of factors that influence these range of estimates. The reliability of current population estimates. Are we actually right with what we think is on the planet right now? Because if we're wrong, the numbers in the future will be off. The assumptions about trends in fertility. There was a classic one, I want to say it was Kenya. They predicted that the fertility rates were going to go down because they had some campaigns, etc., talking about how they should reduce the number of births, but the birth rate did not go down, the fertility rate did not go down, and they wildly missed the population increase that occurred in Kenya. So if you make assumptions about any kind of fertility or number of women that are going to be of birthing age, you wind up dealing with problems. And different organizations estimate populations, use different methods and data. So let's take a look at some of these. So we have, depending on how well you can see it, the top one is in red, then blue, yellow, purple, and green. These are all estimates of the population for 2050. Now, this is also going back to 2010 when this data was being put together. So we're looking at an older chart. So we want to look, how did we get it? Well, if you notice that green one for 2020 has us at, what is that? 7.4 billion people. And the red one looks like it was the closest being on, because in 2020 we have 7.8 billion people. So the red one looks about spot on for 2020. All the others a little low. Now, it doesn't mean the red one's going to be right the rest of the way, but just looking at the tracking. So the red one, the one at the top, is the UN high fertility variant. Thinking, what is it? Keeping the rate high, that's what the UN's saying. Now, the UN has done three. The red, yellow, and green, so using sort of stoplight situation, are all from the UN, and they're saying, okay, if we have a high fertility rate, it'll be the red. If we have a medium fertility rate, it'll be the yellows. They're saying our best guess is probably yellow. And if we actually wind up with a low fertility rate, planet-wide, it could be the green. So they have three. The blue one is the U.S. Census Bureau. The blue is just the U.S. We're saying we're taking the data we have, we're looking at what's there, and we're giving our, what they chose for their fertility rates. I have no idea. And the purple one is the IIASA, and it says it was updated. All these were updated in 2008. Different organizations using slightly different methods to predict the same outcome, and we have wildly different numbers. The green, the low, is predicting we're going to have fewer people on the planet than we currently have. It's a possibility. The others in stages of increase, with the high being 10 billion or 10 billion plus, and of all the other mediums, about 8.5 billion. Once again, wildly differing numbers based on what your outcome prediction is based on. So let's look at the case study again, the U.S. We are the third largest population and growing. 1900, so going back 120 years at this point, there were 76 million people in the United States. 2018, last data that we had for this book, 328 million people in the United States. Quite a growth in 120 years. The TFR, total fertility rate, in the United States has fluctuated. Once again, during the peak of the baby boom, we're around 3.7. In other words, most women were giving birth to about 4 children each. Some with less, some with more, but once again, 3.7, getting darn close to 4 kids each. My family, my father fought in World War II, married his wife overseas from England. My mom came home, and they had 4 children. I'm about as average an American as you run into, but part of the baby boom, 4 children. Now in 2018, that dropped to 1.8. So our total fertility rate in the U.S. as of 2018, 1.8. Well below that 2.1, the replacement rate. So our increasing population would actually begin to drop off based on the numbers. However, 40% of the total population increase in 2015 came from immigration, legal immigration, people moving into the country. And China has actually surpassed Mexico as the largest source of new immigrants. Now, most of these new immigrants come with skills. We give favor to people that have STEM and technology, engineering degrees, and job capacity, or people that come in and they're going to start their own businesses. So immigrants coming into the country are coming in and bringing lots of assets. But 40% of our total population increase in 2015, legal immigrants. Our total fertility rate is 1.8, so our population would be declining, but it's immigration and legal immigration that is having us with a slow rise in our population. So if you take a look at the chart up here, I want to talk about some of these immigration aspects. Now, the largest increase in immigration, that one really sharp high peak, was in 1989. And this was mainly due to the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. So the act was put in 86, and it takes a little time for people to get the paperwork taken care of. This granted legal status to illegal immigrants who could show they had been living in the country before 1982. These people have been living in the country, been working, contributing, etc., and legal status was granted. So that's that one sharp spike based on an act putting in. But this is our immigration rate, and one of the fastest growing. And it tracks a few of the peaks. 1907 was a high peak. In 1914, we had new laws to restrict immigration, and it began to drop down. Down at the very bottom one, it might be hard to see the writing, at 29, looking at it, the Great Depression hit. During the Great Depression was a worldwide depression, and nobody was going anywhere. Nobody was trying to come here because there wasn't work, there wasn't anything. And then after the Great Depression, as the economy got better, we start seeing once again a rise in immigration. People immigrate because you want a chance at a better life. Up here again, if you look at this chart in the yellow and blue, and I realize yellow might be a little hard to see, but we're looking at the changes between 1900 and the year 2000. So we just took the year 1900, coalesced the data, and the year 2000, and collated the data, and this is what we have. Let's look at some of these big differences in the U.S. population. Life expectancy. If you were alive in the year 1900, the life expectancy was 47 years old. Sure, some people lived to be longer, but a lot of people died much sooner. 47 was the life expectancy, the average age somebody in the United States died, 47. Life expectancy in the year 2000, 77 years old. Married women working outside the home. In 1900, 8% of women worked outside of the home. That was almost exclusively nurses and teachers. There weren't a lot of other occupations really available. Some, but that was the big ones. In 2000, 81% of women working outside of the home. In careers as varied as careers are. They're everything. High school graduates. In 1900, 15% of us were graduating from high school. In 2000, 83% of the population had graduated high school. Much better education. Homes with flush toilets. You think with flush toilets as opposed to 98% of homes today with flush toilets. But think about what a running water system in your house does for health and hygiene. That's what that kind of tracks. Flush toilets lets us know there's running water in the house. Homes with electricity, 1900, only 2%. Of course, electricity hasn't been around very long at all. Today, 98%, an exact flip-flop of the numbers. People living in the suburbs. In 1900, only 10% of the population lived in the suburbs, in an urban area. Most of us were rural farming. Today, or in 2020, in the suburbs, 52%. Many of us are now in the suburbs and the urban. More of our population is urban than rural. Hourly manufacturing job wage. In 1900, it was $3. In 2000, it was $15. Now, this isn't minimum wage. This is a manufacturing type job. You know, something beyond flipping burgers at McDonald's. This is working like in a local factory. A friend of mine owns a battery company where they make batteries. That's what we're talking about. A working wage, $15 an hour versus $3 an hour. The economy's changed, but these are just the numbers. And the last one is homicides per 100,000 people. You have Gainesville is 100,000 people. So homicides per year about 1.2. In 2000, homicides per year about 5.8. So these are just some of the numbers and some of the big changes that took place, and think how some of those things affect our current population growth rate. Obviously, life expectancy is a huge one. Birth and fertility rates. What tends to really affect these? One is the importance of children as part of the labor force. We talked about developing or less developed countries tend to have higher fertility rates. They tend to have more children per family than in a developed country. And one of the big ones is they're part of the workforce. If you live in Africa and you have a farm of 10 acres, the more children you have are more hands to work the farm. It's an economic gain. In a developing country, having a lot of kids is an economic cost, because typically they're not going out to work and bringing money into the family until they've finished high school and sometimes even college. The cost of raising and educating children is a big part. If you're in a country where you're putting your kids out to work early, then they're economic benefit. In the United States or most developing countries, the cost of raising and educating children is quite high. The numbers in 2018, the estimated cost to raise a child to the age of 18 or until they go into the workforce in a sense, so it could be college, is about $200,000. And it's not all spent at once, buying clothes, buying food, a space for them to be. It adds up. The availability of pension systems. I'm going to get to retire one day. So, my pension system. I am not dependent on my kids taking care of me when I retire. I'm going to work, putting money away in retirement, so one day I can live off of the wages that I put in. So a pension system, I'm not depending on having a lot of kids. If I got to rely on my kids, I want to have a bunch of them so that I know if some of them will be able to help me out, or they can all pitch in a little bit for when I retire, I can still eat and have somewhere to live. Urbanization is a big factor. People moving into the cities for job work. Once again, that kind of goes into pension systems, etc. And then just educational and employment opportunities for women. It is shown drastically, women that are at work, working in the workforce, tend to have fewer children. Women who are educated tend to have less children. Women that are in the workforce tend to have less children. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. But these are just some of those factors that does it. Another, sort of a different aspect, is the age at which a woman starts to have her first child. Women that tend to have their children after the age of 25 tend to have at least 2 children less than women that start before 25. Once again, in any organism, whether it's bacteria or human, the sooner it begins to reproduce, it reproduces more offspring. So someone who starts when they're 15, 16 will tend to have more children than somebody that starts when they're 25. Once again, you have this only a range of when women are fertile anyway. The availability of reliable birth control. Most developed countries have very reliable and easy to access birth control, but many of the less developed countries do not. They may not have availability, and they're not making as much money, so the overall cost seems much higher. In America, it's disposable income to get it. Somewhere else, you're having to think, do I get birth control or do I eat today? It can be a tough call. And also religious beliefs. There are many religious beliefs and traditions and just cultural norms that are against birth control. So if you live in a culture that's against birth control, you're going to tend to have more children than if you're in a culture that accepts it or even supports it. Just some of these factors that come in. Let's look at things that affect death rates, because it's this combination. It's births minus deaths, birth and immigration minus deaths and immigration. So what are things that affect death? We've looked at birth. What affects birth? Let's look at death. We want to look at the overall indicators of the health of people in a country. The healthier a country is, they tend to live longer and have less child or infant mortality. Life expectancy. Once again, developed countries tend to have a higher life expectancy. Developing or less developed tend to have a lower life expectancy. So if people die sooner, we have more deaths in that equation. Population may go down. The infant mortality rate as well. This is the number of babies born out of every 1,000 who died before their first birthday. So we talk about infant mortality. We're talking about infants that die before their first birthday. Now, I've talked to you before that we lived in Nepal. When we lived in Nepal, one of the people groups that we worked with, the Nuar, had some interesting cultures. And one was the naming ceremony. So they would give birth to a baby, and they would typically call the baby Babu, baby. That was it. They would just refer to it as the baby, and everybody referred to it as the baby. Oh, that was Babu. Until year 1. At the baby's first birthday, that was the naming ceremony. And it was a big deal. There'd be this specific feast, and the woman fasted for a day before, and then she ate all this big mound of food, and they gave the baby its name. It's not on a birth certificate at the hospital, nothing. No name until year 1. Why year 1? So many babies died before the first birthday, you didn't want to waste a name. You wanted to give this specific name to a child, you wanted to pretty much make sure the child would survive. So they didn't even name the children. This was in 2005. Didn't leave Nepal until 2006, 2007. This is still going on today. Even though their infant mortality rate has gone up, the culture still exists of naming. So, an infant mortality rate, any child that dies prior to its first birthday, typically for any reason, but most of those reasons are stoppable. The main reasons children died before their first birthday: insufficient food, not enough food, so they starve to death. Poor nutrition, they're not getting the right kinds of food. They're having to eat corn all the time, they're not getting enough protein and other things. Poor nutrition, not the right vitamins. And then infectious diseases. And a lot of the infectious diseases come from getting water from bad sources. And when they drink water, it's got germs, pollution in it, and they get sick and die. Now, the infant mortality rate. These are children that die every year, largely from for no good reason, honestly. Insufficient food, we should be able to get food, we should be able to get children the right kind of food, and we should be able to keep them from infectious disease, especially ones that are just coming from bad water. Well, let me try and put this in perspective. The number of children that die every day for no good reason would fill up 55 jumbo jets. So in other words, I've got a 747 out there and I've got 200 infants on it, and it crashes and there are no survivors. Think about the splash that would be on the news. We're transporting 200 babies from here to there, and the plane crashed and every one of them died. Think how big of a deal that would be. Yeah, well, it's not one jet a day, it's 55 jets a day, every day. This is the number of children that die every day because of high infant mortality. It's a lot, but it becomes background noise and we don't hear it. But that's the reality. Every single day, children dying by the thousands that don't have to. But it's something that affects our death rates. The overall health and the infant mortality are kind of the big two that we tend to look at. The last thing is migration or emigration, the movement out of specific areas. And the reason most people move is for jobs and economic improvement. It's really bad here, so I'm going to go there where I'm going to have a better chance. Sometimes it's religious persecution or even ethnic conflict. These people are literally trying to kill these people, so these people move. I'm out of here. I want a better thing. So it can be religious persecution, and I want to move somewhere else. Political oppression or war. You're in a war-torn state. I'd just like to leave. I'd like to get out. And in a lot of cases, we do have environmental refugees. These have gotten so bad where they were because there's no food, there's famine, disease of some kind, things that have been, the natural capital's degraded so much, they're trying to leave because it's gotten so bad. The potato famine would be something of that nature. They're really leaving for environmental reasons. But these are some of the reasons that people leave. So they're leaving one and moving into somewhere else that we take into effect for our population changes. That is it for section 6.2. See me next time and we'll talk about their age structure along with population growth. Take care, guys.